I'm driving on Bessemer Hall. I'm driving on Bessemer Hall. I'm driving, keep driving. I'm driving on Bessemer Hall. I'm driving on.
Hi, I'm Craig Summers, and for nearly a year now, I've been powering my vehicle with used cooking oil. That's right, the stuff that the restaurants throw away. How do I do it? Well, that's what this video is going to explore. Well, the diesel engine was actually designed to run on vegetable oil by Rudolf Diesel in the late 1800s. Unfortunately, he disappeared off a ferry boat on his way from France over to England to give a demonstration on alternative fuels. The diesel engine lay dormant for several years and re-emerged in the early 1900s to run on a petroleum product similar to gasoline called diesel fuel. So let me explain to you how this operates. You start the car as normal on diesel fuel. You watch the temperature gauge. When this temperature gauge reaches operating temperature, then it's time to switch over to veggie fuel. This switch right here allows me to switch from the tank which holds the diesel fuel to the tank which holds the vegetable oil. And this is an auxiliary pump that will help pump the vegetable oil through the extra filter and into the engine, because vegetable oil is a little thicker than diesel fuel. So all I would have to do is that, and now I'm operating on veggie oil. About 5 minutes before I get to where I'm going, I switch the pump and the switching valve back to diesel fuel to allow the diesel fuel to flush the vegetable oil out of the lines and then shut down as normal. It's as simple as that. This is the custom aluminum tank that I had built to hold my diesel fuel for startup and shutdown. It only needs to be a few gallons because I'll be using the diesel only for startup and shutdown and using the vegetable oil when I'm driving. The filler tube came out of a junkyard, a wrecked diesel vehicle. The main tank is the one I'm using to hold the vegetable oil, which is a 35-gallon tank. So from the fuel tank holding the veggie fuel, the veggie oil is brought over to this Raycor FH1000 fuel filter. This is the replacement cartridge for this filter. You notice the size of it. It has a lot of surface area because the fuel filters for the vegetable oil tend to clog up faster than it would if it was carrying just diesel. So the greater surface area allows for a longer filter life. Now, changing of this filter is very easy. There's a T-bar right here. I unscrew this T-bar, pull the top off, pull the filter straight out. I catch it in a plastic bag underneath so I don't drip used vegetable oil all over the place, and throw it away. Simply take the new filter, drop it right inside, screw the T-handle back, and voila, I'm done. Now, many people use metal filters to filter their vegetable oil. I don't think it's a very good idea. For one, they're small, they clog up faster. Two, they cost more. Three, you're throwing a lot of metal in the landfill as compared to this, which is just throwing out some paper and a little bit of plastic on the end. This is the lower section of my Raycor FH1000 fuel filter. If you notice, there's a valve right here. This is for draining any water that might be emulsified into the veggie fuel. The filter element itself is impregnated with something that will not allow water to pass through it, but it will allow oil to pass through it. So if there is water, it'll fall to the lower section of this filter compartment, and this is a sensor that will pick up the presence of any water in this filter. It'll send a signal to the driver letting them know that there's some water in there. Then you could simply pull over, loosen this valve, drain the water out, and continue on your way. You'll also notice that there are some heater hoses wrapped around this filter. The engine is cooling itself with engine coolant. All we need to do is pipe that engine coolant down here, wrap these hoses around the filter. The heat from the engine is actually heating up the vegetable oil, thinning the viscosity of it to make it more burnable in the diesel engine. So what we actually have here is a heated fuel line. Inside this pipe insulation, there are engine coolant lines carrying hot antifreeze. Those engine coolant lines are pressed up against the fuel line carrying the veggie oil, thereby heating that fuel line, heating the veggie oil. The pipe insulation keeps the heat in.
Coming from the Raycor vegetable oil filter, the insulated fuel line is routed past the main tank and onto the connection fittings.
This is where our vacuum gauge is connected. Should our veggie oil fuel filter become clogged, it will create more suction in the fuel line, and the vacuum gauge in the passenger compartment will start to read a vacuum. This way we'll know that our filter is becoming clogged up and prevent the engine from stalling, because we'll be able to replace the filter before the engine stalls. This is our return line. Diesel engines have a return line where the extra fuel is returned back to the tank. In this particular installation, instead of returning the fuel back to the tank, returning it back to the suction side of the fuel line, because the fuel coming back from the engine is heated. So why should we dump that heated fuel back into the fuel tank when we can just loop it back into the system and get more heated fuel to where we need it? This is our auxiliary fuel pump. Since vegetable oil is thicker and harder to pump than diesel fuel, and additionally we have an extra fuel filter, we add an extra fuel pump onto the system so that we can be sure to get enough fuel to the engine to have power as needed. This is simply a 12-volt fuel pump. This is our electrically controlled switching valve. There are two fuel lines coming into the switching valve. One is bringing diesel fuel, one is bringing vegetable oil. There's only one line going out that goes into the engine compartment to deliver the fuel to the engine for combustion. These wires are connected to a switch in the driver compartment, which allows us to simply hit the switch to switch from one tank to the other. There are actually no modifications necessary to this Cummins turbo diesel engine to allow it to use vegetable oil as a fuel source. The only thing that I had to do under the hood was add these two T's. These T's are in the engine coolant lines. One of them is bringing heated coolant to the fuel tank to a heated fuel pickup called a hot fox. From there, the heated coolant is directed to the Raycor FH1000 fuel filter to heat the fuel going through the filter. And then these coolant lines travel with the fuel line back to the engine, thereby heating the entire length of the fuel line right up to the point where it's injected into the engine. In cold climates, it's necessary to heat your vegetable oil because it would become so viscous in the tank it would be impossible to bring it into the engine for combustion. So what I've installed in my system is a stainless steel heated pickup. This one's called a hot fox. There are two lines. One of them is where the heated engine coolant is pumped into the heated pickup, and the other one is where the engine coolant comes out of that pickup. The third line is where my heated vegetable oil will be pumped out to go to the engine for combustion. So you notice that the center switch is marked heater. What I have here is an electric heater that's wrapped around my FH1000 fuel filter. Because I'm going to be in a cold climate for part of the year, and it takes a little while for your engine to heat up, I added this extra 12-volt heater to add an extra boost of heat so I can switch over to vegetable oil sooner than I would normally switch over. Because my stock fuel tank that came with the vehicle holds 35 gallons and has a low fuel indicator light, I've decided to use that tank to hold my vegetable oil. I've added a small 9-gallon startup and shutdown tank to hold my diesel fuel, and this is the gauge for that. This gauge is the vacuum gauge. It lets me know when my fuel filter for the veggie oil is starting to get clogged so that I can replace it before the engine will stall. When this gauge reaches around 20, I know it's time to replace my veggie oil fuel filter. And this is a gauge that measures the temperature of my veggie oil. Now this gauge starts at about 130, and I've actually never been able to get a reading off of it. And I've been told by several experts that having a veggie oil temperature gauge is completely unnecessary, and I'm convinced of that at this point. This little jewel right here is a Siren and indicator light connected to the Raycor FH1000 fuel filter. Should there be any water emulsified into your veggie oil and it falls to the bottom of the fuel tank, this siren will go off and let you know that there's water in there before the water has a chance to get pumped through into the engine and destroy your engine. I highly recommend one of these. Some restaurants, if you ask them, will put their used cooking oil back into the jugs of which it came, in which you simply just come to the restaurant and pick up the jugs to bring the oil home to filter. Other restaurants will dump it into one of their dumpsters. For removing that oil, you'll need a pump like the one that I have here, which you just stick the suction end into the oil dumpster and turn it on and fill your jugs so you can transport the oil home. So all that needs to be done after you collect your vegetable oil is to run it through this filter bag before it goes into the engine. You simply pour your oil into the bag or pump it in with a pump. What flows out of the bag and you catch in the bucket, you simply pump or pour right into your tank. And it's as simple as that.
So the way I filter my used cooking oil now is with this unit I call the one-shot unit. It's modeled after one sold on the internet for a little over $800, and I put this together for about $400 in parts. This is a Northern Tool diesel transfer pump. It's a 12-volt pump, and I added about 25 feet of wire on here to give me the distance I need from the vehicle to the oil dumpster. I also added some clear tubing on here. Clear tubing is better because you can see the oil flowing through it. If you notice, there's a piece of clear tubing here, and here, and here. So in the event of a blockage, I would be able to tell right away that the oil wasn't flowing and take care of it before I did damage to my pump. Now I piped this so that I could either use it as a transfer pump, in other words, moving oil from one place to another without it going through the filter, or as a filter unit itself. If I want to just transfer oil, then I open up this bypass and I close this valve so that the oil comes through here, sucked through the pump, and I dispense it to where I need it. When I want to filter oil through the filter, close the bypass, open this valve here, and of course it's going to pull it through the filter now. I made a little strainer at the end of this with a sink strainer, bought in a hardware store. So I would stick my pickup hose into the tank of oil and flip the switch, and away I go. And there are 3 different choices in filters you can get for this pump. The 2 micron, which makes it very, very clean. 10 micron, which is average, and the 30 micron, which makes it clean enough for me, and it gives the greater speed. When I'm on the road traveling and I want to stop to fill up, I really don't want to spend that much time. I have a 30-gallon tank, so I use this 30 micron. The pump itself has a duty cycle of only about 20 minutes. And when the filter starts to clog up, it goes through very slowly. To fill 30 gallons, it could take me sometimes a half an hour. And with this, it could take 45 minutes or more, depending on how dirty my oil is. So I prefer the 30 micron. This is made out of black pipe from a hardware store. I use a 3/4 inch pipe. The first unit that I made, I used garden hose, and the holes in the side, the T's were so small it restricted the flow of the oil. So this has a much larger opening through it, getting more flow, speeding the whole process. When I'm ready to store my unit, I like to store it in a tote that won't leak, because little bits of oil will come out of this end and that end, and of course the thing after a year or two of use, as you can see, is very gunky. So I just keep it in the tote, and this will fit right on my front seat, and tote keeps the oil from leaking into my vehicle. This one-shot unit works great on oil that is room temperature. When it starts to get down into the 60s, the oil starts to get thicker, and this unit will operate slower. It's a good idea to have your oil at least room temperature if you're going to use this unit. Occasionally, when the oil is cold, I'll put it out in the clear QV jugs out in the sun for a while to heat it up. Also, these totes, if you drop them, they crack. And that's the one shot.
So this is how I fill my veggie oil car's tank. I have my veggie oil that I collected from the restaurant, and I filtered it and stored it in this jug that you get for free from the restaurant. And then I have this utility pump, which I've connected to my car battery. It's a 12-volt utility pump. And then these clear hoses, so I could see the fuel traveling through the lines, so that I know that the fuel is flowing and there's no blockages. This is the same fuel type of dispensing valve that you would get right in a regular gas station. And this is actually made for diesel fuel. So I simply flip my switch, squeeze my handle, and wait until my tank is full. As you can see, dogs love used cooking oil. To them it's food. And if you allow your dogs to clean up too much of the vegetable oil, they will puke it up. So if you find your dog eating the vegetable oil you spilled, it might be a good night to let the dog sleep outside.
Here we have a diagram of the fuel system Craig used to convert his diesel pickup. Starting at the veggie oil tank, the fuel flows through the filter, which is a FH1000 Raycor with a 2-micron filter cartridge inside. From there, the fuel flows through this line and past the vacuum fitting. When this filter starts to clog up, it creates a vacuum on this tube which shows a reading on the dash gauge, so the driver knows the filter is starting to clog and to change the filter before the vehicle stalls. From there, the fuel flows past the return line. On a standard diesel engine, the excess fuel is routed back to the diesel tank. But since this fuel is heated, one can loop it back into the line on the suction side of the fuel pump and retain the heated oil where it is needed. From here, the fuel flows through the pump and on to the switching valve. The switching valve allows one to choose between the veggie oil and the diesel tanks. From there, the fuel is routed to the engine into the stock fuel filter. The stock fuel filter, which is designed to filter diesel fuel, is very small and costs about $35. And it's also a 2-micron filter. So if we used a larger micron filter in the Raycor, then the particles would go through and clog this $35 filter too quickly, which is also very challenging to change. So it is suggested, if you do the system, to keep the micron size the same or smaller in the veggie oil filter than the stock filter of the vehicle you are converting. There you have Craig's system that has worked very well for him.
national security, driving on vegetable oil. Reducing my dependence on foreign crude, driving on vegetable oil. The farmers of America grow my fuel, driving on vegetable oil. When the restaurant is done, I collect it on the run, driving on vegetable oil. I'm driving on vegetable oil. Keep driving on vegetable oil till I get the technology to fracture water, driving on vegetable oil. It burns a little cleaner than fossil fuels, so I'm driving on vegetable oil. Soon we'll all use hydrogen and oxygen, but now I'm driving on vegetable oil. I'm driving on vegetable oil. I'm driving on vegetable oil. Keep driving. I'm driving on vegetable oil. I'm driving on